we're ready to get started.
Okay.
Can you just briefly maybe tell us about how you first got into the industry before we get into
Sure. So I'll give you the whole story. Yeah. Okay. So I think from the age of maybe 13, I wanted to be in music.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, I wanted to make music. So whereas at school I was in bands, quite typical stuff. And when I went to university, I carried on with that. It's a long time ago. It was in the 80s, but I sort of transferred a little bit from playing guitar to DJing and producing more sort of UMG sort of infantry dance based music. I carried on with that, and I went to law school after university, but I had a couple of years in between when I was just in music. And I also at that time started an independent record label in Philippines. Worked on that throughout my time at law school. Then, to qualify as a lawyer, you change in that. You need to work for 2 years in a law firm, which I did. And I also was doing the sort of business affairs and legal work for the company I started. And I sort of during that period, I sort of transitioned slowly out of the creative side of making music into the business side. I was sort of doing both for a bit, but slowly over time. But basically because I didn't become a sort of famous music star. And then I got a job. I left law firm and I went to work at university as a lawyer. And I worked there for a couple of years, and I moved from there to EMI, also as a lawyer. And then I left EMI in 2006. And I went back I managed a band, and I also set up another independent label. And through that work, I met the people who should start Merlin. And they asked me to help, and that developed into a job. And fast forward 15 years, and I'm still there.
That's right. So, do you remember the name of your band? Keep us speak.
I do. So that band was called Down By.
So, you mentioned working at Universal and EMI, and then you moved on to City Rockers.
Yeah.
How would you compare working in a major versus City Rockers?
So the big difference then, probably in a lot of cases, is that if you're working in a big corporate, your job is very much, you've got your one job, focus on that. You have lots of support. I had PAs, and there's like a print room, all the facilities to help you. When you go and start your own business, or you work in most independent labels, you should have to everything yourself. And even when we started Merlin, there was only 2 of us. So we had sort of nice job titles, but we still had to go and do the PAs and sort of print stuff out and do those jobs too. That's I've had with these deliveries. Also, there's other things as well. Big companies, particularly public companies, I was often very motivated by producing results for whatever it is, quarterly or yearly filings with some other company with stock exchange. So the drivers of what people do can be quite different. They might just do something in March because you need to get money from before the end of that quarter. Whereas in the independent label, it's done very well by left.
So you joined about 8 months after Chevy, right? And
So the history of Merlin is that at the beginning of 2007, a group of companies announced, okay, we want to start this licensing organization called Merlin. I got involved. They asked me in September to start helping with it. we didn't actually start in business until April 2008.
Huh.
So I was there at the beginning to actually start doing business, never to origin. I don't know.
How did that lead to you then becoming CEO?
Really, as I said, there was two of us at the beginning,
Yeah.
right? So I just hung around one night. No, I mean, okay, so it's the core of what Merlin does is music licensing. And, from the beginning, my role was basically being in charge of that side of the business. So, I've always had that sort of core role and always done that function in the business. And just as the business develops, a bit more people, and you start to need to be a bit more organized about who's running the swap and giving people with real experience. You can hopefully pass that on and manage other people. So,
do you think the fact that it started as only two people allows you to better connect with other indie record labels?
That's a big question. Yes, definitely. No, definitely. I think, I think two things. That, but also because me and the other sort of first employee, guy called Charlie Lexton, we both had a really bad experience of working in the independent sector.
Mm-hmm.
So we both had a sort of understanding and a feel for the types of issues and the type of who felt sort of like the expect.
Mm-hmm. What kind of advantages do you think an indie label has right now compared to big majors?
Well, independents tend to be able to move more quickly and react more quickly to changes in the industry. So, and in particular, this has been going on really for 20 years since Napster was starting the transition to digital. So, look, this is not true of all independents, but in most independents are very much smaller businesses and major record labels. So a major record label will have a lot of people, a lot of buildings, and just a big overhead that they have to meet. So if next week something dramatic happens in the music industry, then it is transition to digital. They can't just sort of say, right, we're going to change our business and do this, because they've got a whole existing structure they've got to feed. Because independent labels don't quite have that, so they're able to be a bit quite flexible. Also, independence, not always again, but traditionally tends to be owned by one of them. That means that those people can make decisions themselves. They don't have to report to the board, like I was saying earlier, to effectively to justify what they're doing to the stock market. So again, they're freer to make their own decisions, take potentially bigger risks, and operate. I mean, it's sort of the names of it, they're not going to trade more independently.
Yeah. So does the flexibility also translate to signing agreements with artists? Are they allowed to be more flexible even than bigger?
Yeah, I mean, so actually, I would do it at a different starting point, in the sense that the starting point is any company can sign any agreement it wants with anyone that wrote that free name.
Yeah.
In a major record label, because it's a bigger organization, more people, more structure, they need to have rules and processes to operate, which is understandable. Because if you've got the head of the label sitting in New York, there's no way they can monitor what someone in France is doing or what someone in Indonesia is doing. So they have to have rules, and those rules will say if you're signing an artist, then you have to. It's been a long time since a major record company, but it's stuff like you have to sign within 5 agreements. You have to get worldwide rights. You have to own the copyright. You can't pay a big advance on this unless you get signed from someone. So a whole set of rules and parameters that need to be followed. Whereas, most independent labels, it is probably like an A&R department doing the deal, and their boss is the person who owns the company, doesn't do anything with it. So they might say, look, we can sign this artist. I know we normally want to get whatever it is for our albums, we're going to get 2. And I know we don't like to pay more than whatever percent quality, but I can't get it unless I pay like you said minimum. And the owner would probably say, yeah, go ahead. Whereas in a major, maybe you can get stuff changed, but we're going to have to get through all sorts of permissions. And if it's a competitive situation, which it often is to say an artist, it might be too late by the time the okay comes back. So there's a very different dynamic. That is, that's the sort of traditional difference between independents and majors. That is narrowing now, in the sense that there's a lot of independents which are becoming bigger, and you have much more venture capital, mainly independents now, which is sort of related to the growth of digital. Talk about that if you want. And the majors realize they need to be more flexible. So it's not quite as sort of distinct as it used to be, but there's definitely still sort of like those themes are sort of.
Could I elaborate on the growth of digital?
Well, that point. So when I started working in music a long time ago, the sort of world of finance was very reticent to becoming involved in the music industry. So if you were a small label and you're into your raise capital, you would probably find it very, very difficult to go. You might want to get a link to a bank to access sort of venture capital type money would be very difficult. Basically, because the music industry was extremely unpredictable. So I always remember when I worked at Universal, I was on some like executive development course, and Lucian Grange came one day on this course to give a talk, and he was basically saying, he took us through like the minutes of an A&R meeting from, I think it was like a year or 18 months before, and his whole thing was, he was pointing out how hit and miss it all was, because as great as they all thought they were at being hot, and a lot of it was almost like tossing a coin. And probably if 1 in 10 signings was like properly successful, that is like a good time. And so because it was so unpredictable, venture capital and sort of investment money was not really willing to get involved, because they want to see a business plan that, okay, we're going to put this money in day one, what's going to happen after 6 months, what's going to happen after a year, and ultimately how we're going to get our money back in profit. That has changed, like totally it's about a 180 turn, because the thing about subscription, say particularly Spotify, and also Apple, YouTube Music, Amazon, is subscription is like once you get to scale in subscription, so once you have a certain number of subscribers, so once you're like into the millions of subscribers, it's an incredibly predictable business. So a company like Spotify, which is, I can't remember what the number is, but they have over 1 billion subscribers worldwide. And obviously they've been operating for what, coming up 16 years. And they know, they basically know the day that a subscriber signs up, they know what the lifetime value of that subscriber is, because they've got data going back 16 years on millions and millions of subscribers. And the sad thing is, once you start looking at the data about people's behavior, is once you sort of take people and margins away, the vast majority of people individual will behave in a very similar way. So what that means is the subscription business is incredibly stable. And if I know that if I have 55 million subscribers today, I know what I'm going to earn from them over the next 10 years. Obviously, it's not absolutely precise, but with actually an amazing degree of precision. And what that means is it becomes a very attractive investment opportunity, because, and this is happening a lot, people are saying, okay, I have a catalog on all the subscription services, and my earnings for the last year have been on average, or it doesn't matter what it is, $50,000 a month for a year, it doesn't matter. there are lots of companies now that will say, okay, I will buy that revenue from you and give you however much, 20 times that money. But you can assign me the rights to receive that revenue. Whatever, 20 years, it could be 15 years, it could be forever. And it's just become a very sort of investable and predictable business. So that's something that has changed. And it means that the music industry will attract more money to invest in artists, ultimately.
So just the fact that, independent records are getting bigger now and getting more power, does that help Merlin? Or
yeah. So the basic idea behind Merlin is so the basic idea when Merlin started was, if you tomorrow wanted to go and start a digital music service, then as long as you've got the money to pay for it, it's relatively easy to get whatever it is, 70% of the market. And let's say it's a service that you want to charge people for, so you need to give them access to it and so that can be great. You can just do 3 deals. You can do a deal with Universal, with Warner, and Sony, and you've got something like 70% of the music that's used. But if you can be charging people whatever, $10.99 or $11.99 a month, right? You can't have them looking for something and then not being able to find it. So you do need to get the independent sector as well. Otherwise, you're subscribers. Even if you say, you know what, actually, I only care about the top half of the independent sector. If you're going to go and do deals to get that music on the service, that's something like 300 or 400 deals. So if you're running a service, you do not have time to go and do 300 or 400 deals. And in fact, the only way you can do that is doing what you can see what TikTok on the list is doing, what TikTok's doing now, which is just sending the same deal to those 300 or 400 independent companies, and saying, if you want to be on the service, sign here. We can't negotiate anything with you. We don't have time. These are the terms. And that was the situation with the digital music sector when Merlin started. So the problem with that was inevitably that those deals that were sent out to the independent companies were not as good as the deals with the majors. Yeah. So the idea of Merlin was to recognize that inefficiency and enable us to go to the services and say, we understand why it's happening, but we're providing a solution, which is, in other words, like, good news, you can get all of these rights with one deal. Other news, it needs to be a competitive deal to enable these companies to be majors. Mm-hmm. So the bigger the market share we can represent, and eventually can answer your question, the bigger the market share we can represent, the theory is the better deal that we can get. So yes, the more successful independent labels are, who are Merlin members to participate in agreements, in theory, the better deals that we can get.
How do better deals look like with, with Spotify, YouTube Music, Apple Music, compared to if they were to be signed to a big label and not a member of the label?
I don't know what's in the major record deals, but what you can do, because Spotify is a public company, it publishes its accounts, and it does, in its accounts, it talks about who its biggest partners are and its biggest source of the music. You can reverse engineer the deals, basically, because you can see how much they're spending on rights and know what percentages they're getting from certain parties. And I'm assuming know what we're getting. So I know that our deals with Spotify, Apple, YouTube's, I think YouTube Music as well. YouTube's changed over the years, didn't it? Are all essential. They're not going to be exactly the same as a major company has, but they'll be similar, like very similar. The big difference, so if you're a record label, this a member in Merlin, you've got a choice. Am I going to put my rights onto Spotify and YouTube and whatever, via Merlin, or am I going to sign a deal with a major record company distributor to put my rights via that? The big difference is we charge a very, very low fee, much lower than you would pay to a big company, a major distributor. But we do less. There's a set of services that we don't provide, but the majors probably do what they need to do for themselves. So the difference between what they would pay a major and what they pay us needs to be sufficient to enable them to do those jobs.
Yeah. At the start of you answering the question, you mentioned, Spotify, which is their biggest partners in the services. So, how does Merlin make sure that the smaller artists and more independent labels aren't getting overlooked in these deals? And do the deals like the same for all these labels?
So we have one deal. So all of our members benefit from exactly the same terms. So it's a good question because, for example, in these deals, you will often have, apart from the very basic terms, which would be sort of how long is the deal for and how much money you pay us. Over time, they get more sophisticated. So lots of them have different type of marketing benefits. They get credits to place advertising on the platform. And then we, another efficiency that we provide to the services is it will administer them. So you don't have to deal with the 300 labels all looking for some promotion opportunity. We will spread it out. So how do we do it? We do it as fairly as we can. But it's inevitable that not every single artist or every single label will get the same. But you just have to use your sort of knowledge in the sector. Also, of course, not every artist, every label is putting out a record exactly at the same time. So it actually does narrow it down. But we have to try and do it fairly. You can't say that every release by every artist is going to get the same opportunities because the number of opportunities don't exist. There's a sort of, basically a Spotify or any service is limited by the number of people using the service and how long. So, if you have advertising money that you can use, they have a limited amount of entry. So inevitably, there has to be choices made between different releases.
This participations to get in tech companies as well.
Yeah, because those kinds are Apple, YouTube, Facebook, Meta, right? So they're all tech companies. Spotify would characterize itself as a tech company, I think. These are SoundCloud, Pandora, which is like American internet radio. So they're all tech or music tech companies. So yeah.
Is that why are you trying to leverage this relationship with tech companies? And is that why you started Merlin Connect?
So Merlin Connect actually is different.
So
the idea of Merlin Connect is, the problem behind Merlin Connect is the music industry is ridiculously complicated and very difficult to deal with. Because, first of all, I'm sure probably everybody knows this, in a recording, there's actually two copyrights. There's the recording and then there's the song that's been recorded. So to do anything, you need to get two sets of permissions. And on the recording side, it tends to be, not always, but it tends to be the same person or company who owns the rights worldwide. The way the music publishing industry, that's the side of the industry that deals with the song side of it, the way that that's structured, you have to go almost territory by territory around the world. So again, I'm going to go back to the example of you setting up your music subscription service. On the recorded music side, it's relatively easy. Like I said, you can do deals with majors, you can deal with Merlin and a few other companies. Almost for all the recorded music and write. On the music publishing side, the song side, I think we have to do something like 60-something agreements. That's really, really complicated. time-consuming, inefficient. So if I am a company like, I'm sure everyone knows Campbell, probably music. So we had a deal plan. If I'm Campbell, I'm not in the do business. I'm making presentation tools, simple like that. So if I think it'd be really good if I could let our users to music, let me try and get the music rights. And suddenly I'm confronted with, I've got to do like 75 agreements to do this. It's just unjustifiably complicated. So the idea of Merlin Connect is to say, okay, this is a service for non-music platforms who want to use it. And it's saying, we understand that it's very complicated and time-consuming, expensive to clear music rights for your service. So we're going to present you with a sort of package which clears all those rights for you straight away, and also because you're not a music service and you're not charging people for the use of it, you probably don't think you need to have every song in the world. So our idea is if you have 100,000 songs, maybe less, that's probably enough of a choice for people who want to make a birthday card or a PowerPoint presentation, whatever it is, or an Instagram post, or whatever it is. So this says to you, right, we can give you that many tracks. You only have to do one agreement, and it's very, very simple. And you don't have to deal with the complexity of the music industry. So that's the concept of communication.
This kind of payout for companies, like if it do the artists receive it for every time for music song, or
now you're asking me to remember what's in our agreements. Yes. So ultimately, yes. So basically, we're paid. I actually can't remember if we're paid just one fee or we're paid every time music used. I think the way that type of agreement to be structured is there'll be a payment each time music's used, and each time music's used, or every month we'll get a report of, this track was used 23 times in Australia, this one was used 32 times in France, and here's the royalty, agreed with you, and then that enables us to pay it through to the label of the artist. So yeah, it's flagged through.
I don't want to take some AI questions, but I usually people are very.
It's obviously inevitable that we do.
Yeah. How does Merlin just be the introduction of AI ultimate creation, and how would that look in terms of copyright deals and licensing agreements?
Perfection. Well, I guess the first thing is noting that was for sure, right? Because we're actually in the very early days of AI. Second thing is, this is giving me time to think about the actual answer. The second thing is that AI is not one thing, right? There's a whole load of different applications and tools, all of which come under the banner AI. So I don't think you can say our policy on AI is this. We like it, we hate it. There's lots of different aspects to it. So if you think about different sort of possible applications of it, actually, before I say that, I think one of the key things for us in terms of what's actually to AI. First things first, right? It's not going away, right? So you've sort of got a binary choice, which is, do I engage with it or do I not engage with it? And being passive and not engaging with it is its own sort of active choice. If you make the assumption that it's not going away and it's going to be a significant factor in the music industry, by choosing not to engage with it, I think you're sort of committing suicide. So that's the first choice. So our choice is we have to engage with it. And then you get into the detail. So AI can be and I think will, everything from I press a button and it creates an album at one extreme, and that can compete with our companies' sort of existing catalogs and new music. It can be what I think would be a useful tool. Like my artist went to recording in English. I put it into a model and say, can you produce versions in, Spanish, Greek, French, Italian, every language, sung by the same voice, same artist, but just language versions. To me, would be helpful. And because artists do that anyway, they record in different languages. It can be, which I think will happen, which is things like company might come to us and say, can we use your music to train Dorado to produce sort of live production music, and all this is going to be used for for music in hotels or in department stores. That's not really the business we're in. So actually, is that a way of getting into that business? So that's another possible. I can see another possible application, and then all the way to creating tools for creators to use. So I'll give an example. When CDs first came out, Philips, which owned EMI Records, I remember, was the owner of one of the owners of the patent in CDs. And so what that meant was that every CD that was sold in the world from every record company, they got a small payment. So if there is somebody creates some AI-based tool that becomes a standard part of kit that people use to make music, if you've got a tiny fractional interest in that because you find some music to train in it, does that mean that, I can actually get a tiny fraction of everything that Universal does and Sony does? So that's just a few really different examples of what it can, what I could see can happen to be. So I think that you need to do all of that, or engage with all that anyway, to mitigate against the risk of your business just disappearing because the world changes and suddenly, everything's done by artificial intelligence. I don't think it will get to that stage, but there's clearly a risk to our business. And so, like I said, I think it's almost compulsory to engage with it, if only to mitigate that risk.
Is there something you're understanding right now with AI?
Yes.
Something that you can tell us about?
No. No, I seriously, I can't say it's confidential. Did you ask Dan Chalmers about that?
Yeah.
What did he say?
No comment.
What did it say?
Yeah. So, yeah, okay. And so one last question then. You can open that out to your board. Do you have any advice against 18 to 20 year olds who are trying to get into the music industry right now?
Yeah, I think I could actually. So do people want to work in music?
I think that's...
Honestly, I think that my number one piece of advice is you need to love music. That sounds like really, really obvious, but the music industry is full of people, lots and lots of different jobs. But I would say that, I don't know the majority, but a big chunk of the people that work in our company actually have come from backgrounds where they either made music, or they ran clubs, they DJ'd or whatever. So that actual real genuine interest in music, love music, is like a massive advantage, because it suddenly just gives you this sort of bank of knowledge about the business that you're going to be working in. So that would be my first thing. Second thing is this problem is, as I get older and I ask these sort of questions, I realize how sort of more dull it sounds. But getting experience, work experience, actually doing anything related to music is really, really helpful, because first of all, you can be learning about business you're going to work in. But second of all, when people, when you're looking for jobs, or even if you want to start your own thing, the fact that you've got that experience and background actually really makes a difference. It really counts. So, very often when we're recruiting for jobs, actually the first thing we're recruiting for jobs is I'm always amazed at how qualified the applicants are. It's actually a bit scary. They, generally all been to really good universities and got really good degrees. But then a question often that we ask ourselves is, are they actually really interested in business? So you can assess that from a number of different ways. One is to see, okay, is there something on their CV that tells you are they interested in music? And then the other basics stuff like, have they done their research? Do they know about stuff? And so if you're actually really interested and you surround yourself with it, then that part almost becomes easy because you're not putting something on. It's what you're interested in. So I'd say that, and I'd also say, educate yourself. Read the music press. Keep up to date with whatever sort of music you're interested in. Try and be aware of all these type of issues which UMC are, because we obviously release difficult questions. But what I'd also say is I think there's lots more opportunities nowadays than there were when I was coming out of university. And I think there's much more sort of formal routes to get into a career. So I don't know whether anybody sees it, but every week Music Business Worldwide sends out a sort of industry jobs email, which has tons of jobs on it. And that didn't be the case. It used to be like a bit mysterious about how you would get into the music industry. So I think there's lots of opportunities out there.
I'm here. Open it up to phone. So
Fine.
Questions, which is big range of excuse we can say. I was looking. You mentioned earlier that you talked about the money for you asked about the money because how it reaches the office. I was wondering, specifically the way that investors work and which way they give their money to, and how exactly they get to multiple parties, or is it one individual then to how it passes on and to the rest of the people involved?
So in lots of different ways, right? So you might have like an individual who, for whatever reason, has money to invest and will be looking for businesses which they want to invest in. To get investment from someone like that, it'd be very relying on personal contacts because I don't know how you would sort of come across that sort of person. But there are also a number of investment funds which are like in the other investment funds where company or bank or whatever it is raise money from multiple sources, maybe individuals, maybe other companies, and the purpose of that fund would be to invest in. It could be to invest in copyrights, so they might be looking to buy recorded music catalogs or music publishing catalogs, or they may be looking to buy a share of like companies, or what I was saying earlier about buying into revenue streams and got someone who's got a track record and leveraging some money, and they'll say, well, I'll give you 5 years worth of that money up front, but you give me 6 years of it back or whatever it is. What else? The major rep companies investing, they're always looking for what's next, because to go back to that question about sort of downstream majors and independents, which I didn't say this, one of the independents tends to work longer and put more time into developing artists whereas major ad companies almost want the finished product straight away. And so one way of getting that is to look around for small labels or entrepreneurs who have developed artists, whether it's as a management company, and they'll invest in them for a buyout of that company. So there's lots of different possibilities like that.
Okay, so let's say basically someone that's given to the label list or label then is that in what way do you think it makes to
Yeah, or it might be a management company, it might be someone who's managing a number of artists. It could be that they lend the money, it could be they buy off the company. There's sort of almost like every way you can imagine those two different types of tools.
Great. Yeah.
I've heard that a lot of money gets lost in translation, especially when it comes to like collection stuff like that. One, is that true? And if so, what kind of solutions or like even technologies we like explored to like make that whole space better?
So it's true. Not lost, but gone not necessarily in the right direction. So going back, go back 25 years, quite often, if not most of the time, if a radio station or TV channel would pay either a lump sum or they say we've played this many hours of music this month or whatever it is, and the fee that we need to pay for that is whatever it is. But what they won't produce with that, what they weren't required to produce with that, was a log of like everything that we played. So you have like these bodies called collecting societies, sort of have that money, and then they'll have, okay, we're sitting on whatever it is, $1 million, and it doesn't matter how much. We need to pay it out to writers or producers, but we don't know who's on which bit. And then what they would then tend to do is say, okay, what we have here though is we've got the information for Radio 1, whatever it is, Capital Radio. We've got information from the broadcasters in this example who did give us information. Okay, we're going to use the percentage shares of each artist that they have there to allocate this money. And so what tended to happen was, if you're Paul McCartney, you just got the biggest share. And they call that black box money for obvious reasons. It's just you can't. It's not transparent. You can't see what it is. In theory, the digital world solves that because on using Spotify as an example, the catalog that we license to Spotify is streamed in total billions of times a month. We get a report every month of every individual stream, and a royalty attached to every individual stream. So there's no reason why any of that shouldn't go to the right place, and it does. So technology and digital has solved a massive part of that. And it's the same with broadcasters, because in the days when it was just some DJ, I don't know, this, and no records, we know everything digitized. So there's a perfect record of it with that. Where it's not gone full circle, but a challenge that you get nowadays is some deals are what we call flat fee deals. So they'll say, we do a deal with a digital platform, and they say, right, for this year, we're going to pay you this amount of money, and we can use the music, not however we like, but doesn't mean we can only use the music this number of times. It's just how much we use it. And then if it's a global platform, let's say that it doesn't match about that. Let's just say it's like $1 billion, and you've got all this activity in Thailand, all this activity in Argentina, all this activity in Canada, and let's imagine that it's a platform that makes its money from advertising. Do you think it's right that you would pay the same for activity in Canada as you do in Argentina, knowing that economically in the digital advertising market in Canada is a lot stronger than it is in Argentina. So then you have to make decisions about, okay, am I going to weight activity in a developed market as being more valuable in an undeveloped market? And then you get other sorts of complicated issues like you said, okay, well, some of this activity is just 30-second clips and some of it is full tracks. Should the short one be worth less? And what about if the short one is something that somebody actually chose to listen to, clicked and listened, and the long one was just the sort of radio playing in the background? And then so if the money is not directly apportioned to each individual piece of activity, you've got to work out some way of who am I going to pay it how. We have something to look at that. We try and do it in as sort of reasonable and fair way as possible. If you're a big corporation, you might want to do that, but you also might think, oh, well, the tax rate in the US is lower than it is in France. So actually, if I'm going to choose where to make profit, I want to shift some of it to a lower tax venue in the higher one. So you're asking about, does it still go on? I think yes, a little bit in different ways, but I think it's much, much better than it was. Technology means there's sort of no reason for it to go on, other than if you're left with a choice about how am I going to apportion value between different types of activity.
Is it fully transparent with like Spotify and TikTok and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Is it just what they tell you?
Well, are they telling us the truth?
Yeah.
I think that, yeah. So, we say, what's this? You have rights in your agreements to audit your partner. So we've done audits on Spotify. There's nothing wrong. I mean, literally, maybe you spot like literally the odd human error, but of like tiny value. So I know, and I can say publicly that they're totally straight, and we get detail of every single transaction.
And then TikTok's a private company.
Yeah, but I guess, look, to be fair, to TikTok, we also get full reporting. So we see every single view and every track that's used to create some blame. But I don't think they really have a reason to hide that. Well, they don't.
Okay.
The issue with them is more like what they're prepared to play. I think they're transparent. But their model of how they pay doesn't cost them anything actually to be transparent. So
good.
And the more people go, what company is close to progression, like doing something limits are fairly further, like this each other and kissing and those with the suburbs. That's a good question. So unfortunately, the company that I always think on there's a company called EMEA, which is a really innovative company. So I guess like when I started in music, it was quite simple. People like either record companies, or music publishing companies, or a management company, and they sort of existed quite separately. So when those guys who run M3 started it was much more of a company where they said, okay, this is a different work now. It's more difficult to earn money in the music industry. We're not going to limit ourselves to just being a record company, just being a management company. Or even just being something like a merchandising company. We're going to look at each project we want to work on and work out, okay, what is the best way of us running this project? Is it something we think would be most suitable to be on a major record label? It's not something we can do ourselves. We'll manage it. Is it something we think, we could put this out as an independent ourselves and maybe find some partners in other countries? And we'll do that one like that. So I think that sort of sounds quite obvious, but it was actually really innovative because people were really looking at this sort of music business. I say it's unfortunate because Universal bought them. So they used to be a company that we work with, but this is what I was saying about how the measures are changing in terms of how we're finding things. So they're a really interesting company. there's other companies that come up. So there's it's normally companies that are run by young people. So there's companies who will work with artists who don't want to, an artist maybe that starts with a major record company and doesn't want to be with a major anymore, wants to do stuff for themselves and quite significant, but still needs help. So we have one company that we work with, and actually I'm struggling to remember that name, but it's a distributor in New York, and they put out the new Kanye album, and they've done really well with that. So that's a sort of interesting innovation because they're putting out records that normally a major record company would put out, but they've sort of found a way to do it independently. But there's all sorts of different examples. But I think the main thing is that I think the most interesting new companies are just thinking about the business in a different way. They're not limiting themselves to being like, I'm just going to be a record company, or I'm just going to be conventional. For example, let's ask, yeah. Oh, you want special reading as well? Yes, go ahead.
Does the growth of companies such as Believe Music have an impact? If you look at Merlin,
What about Believe?
does it have an impact on your work at Merlin, or the zero impact on?
So you're a fan of Believe because you're French. Yes. So Believe used to be a member of Merlin, and then they decided that they didn't want to be, and they wanted to do stuff only on their own. So they're a competitor. So it does have an impact because they're a competitor. They're not an enemy, they're just a competitor. And they do something similar to us, but different. Because they provide more services than we provide. So their fees will be more expensive because they do more. So we may be competing to represent the same companies, and it will depend on what those companies require in terms of services. And we'll be doing all the same deals as them with all the music services. So yeah, it's just it's another company in a very similar space.
Just bringing it back onto the topic of Kanye's new album, actually.
Yeah.
I saw somewhere that he's used AI in his new album,
Right.
and he's put it out, so he's making money off the AI.
Yeah.
But the thought I had was that AI is probably trained on the intellectual property of his old albums,
Right.
which probably aren't owned by him. They're probably owned by you. I think it's Def Jam, Universal.
Yeah.
So where's that kind of going? Because I can see that potentially being a big problem down the line when labels crack down on that, realize that that's probably happening.
Yeah, so I don't know, right? But I think that if it was known that he's used his Universal M recordings in his new record, then we can't down on it right now. So he had a sample of the album from Wiz Khalifa, and it delayed the release because it hadn't been cleared with Universal. So yeah, I think that's quite simple actually. I think the position is if you're using music to train a model, you're definitely using that copyright and you need permission. That'd be our position. There are cases going on at the moment about whether that's right or wrong, but definitely if a Universal knew about that, they'd have something to say right now.
Because you get down and say I trained on my voice, and they wouldn't know. Like say so.
Yeah, that becomes difficult to know that. Yeah, but that's sort of like a question of like evidence, right? It was principle. But I'm sure that if Universal suspected that was the case, then I don't think they would just sit back and do nothing right. But maybe they do. Maybe there's a deal. Right? Maybe they've got like a percentage share.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Maybe.
You was wondering, you are someone who's to something. What do you think you bring to your role? What kind of is required to do the role that you do and make it?
don't know if I'm the right. I don't know if I'm the right person to ask. Okay, I think I bring. Like I was saying earlier, I'm like I've always wanted to work in music, right? So I bring that enthusiasm, some degree like of knowledge of the business. So I think that's a sort of starting point. You can't get away from having experience, which the sort of is sort of self-serving. But the more experience you have, I think the more you realise how important that is. Which is not very helpful for telling young people, but nevertheless. In our situation, I'm staying calm, right? So like something like this TikTok story that's happened, don't panic. Try and see the big picture, because we have a staff with 50 people working for us, and it is worrying for people for sure. Like they want to know, what does it mean? Is it going to impact other staff? So being honest with them, but also being reassuring. Know how, like don't tell anybody, but a lot of these deals are all very similar. So actually, once you've done a few, you sort of know what you're doing. You have to keep that quiet in a way so we can find out. It's really easy. But look, to be serious, also sort of technical. No, I think you've got to be good at your job, and I think I've been reasonably good at my job, and trying to think beyond like now, like what's important. So, I mean, it's stuff that's not actually that exciting, though. Things like when we first did our initial agreement with Spotify, just thinking of things like, okay, if this became a really big business, what type of stuff might be important at that point? And then it gets into like real details, like things like how much you're going to get charged for, like if they take payment by credit card, how much of that will be the fees they pay, and like in the beginning of the deal, that's sort of meaningless because there's not a lot of money involved. But once it becomes at scale, it becomes really significant. So all of that. And actually, the other thing you also got what I bring to it, because I had a background working for a major company, is actually I think we sort of know how professionalism at those companies, because those companies are really good at what they do. To bring that into the independent sector, I don't think that we could have done Merlin that sort of like important than him.
That's really good. That was
Sure.
You mentioned that it was an M period, but you don't have a partnership with them anymore. If you see it or support brand, was it the same when because
PS,
are they still a member because they got bought by university?
I've got to send them a notice terminating the membership action because they got. As I'm going to analyze it, they were already hot, like 49% on Universal. Yeah. And yesterday it was announced that they bought the rest of them. So they were one of the founding members of Merlin, and one of the owners actually stepped down at the end of last year, but was on our board from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. So they have been in Merlin. Mm-hmm. They are in some of our agreements still, where that will now tail off. But yeah. One of the sort of membership rules is if you're wholly owned by a major company, you can be a member. Because if you think about it, if we next time we do a deal with a service, if we send the terms we've agreed to our members, which we do, which I'm sending it to, yes, I will be sending it to Universal. I'll be telling Universal how to do this, which I can't do. So if that happens, companies sort of do get major owned. But a big part of PS's business is a distributor, so they represent lots of other independent labels. So there will definitely be some independent labels who think, actually, I don't want to be distributed by Universal, so I'm going to find another independent distributor. So we'll definitely see some of the rights coming back into Merlin, but via other companies. Okay. But our relationships are very good. I spoke to with founders yesterday. It's just part of the sort of life cycle. They started that company about 40 years ago. So it comes to a stage where they think the founders, well, what am I going to do in the beginning? Give it to kids, to charity, or am I going to sell my interest and give the money to my kids to maybe say, I need this, see part of that cycle. So they're not the first company that we have lost or won't be the last. But we have new companies coming in, so it's just part of this, again, it's part of the sort of life cycle.
Yeah.
So
we went now.
that's great.
Question about the deals you mentioned before.
Right.
You mentioned how it's basically kind of we make it a lot less hassle free. We have such a very one-to-one. So I was wondering about two things. So firstly, is it that you have to understand how exactly works legally, or do you make all the individual deals happen yourself and then you create a separate document that sums it all up in your listing, or is there also kind of pre-agreed thing with the companies that you do the first every single deliverable companies that everything?
Okay, so the way it works, I'll try to explain this simply like I can. So we have a membership agreement, and all the labels and distributors that we represent sign that. It's the same agreement for everybody. And what that agreement says is you give us the rights to license your rights to digital music services. But it also says every time we want to license your rights to digital music service, so for each individual deal, we have to come back to you, notify you of the terms that we're proposing, and you have a 2-week window to decide whether you want your rights to be in the deal. They are in the deal unless you tell us you don't want them to be, so you can opt out. So you don't opt out by sending us, like pressing a button basically, and like matching to. You don't opt out, then we have the rights. So with the service, we're just doing one contract, and with our members, there's like 400 individual whatever it is deals, but it's the same deal for everybody. So it's not like we have to negotiate a huge one, and they all get the same notice, and it's all quite automated. So that's how it works. I think that answer the question. So we don't. So you cut. Yeah, it's not done like case by case. This is the short answer. But each individual company basically gets a choice each time. But the framework and the structures all there. You'd have to negotiate how much they get paid and all that sort of stuff. That just goes into the system.
Okay. Don't think this that it renewed then it is every few years or something like that is.
Yeah, it's basically you sign up, and every few years we'll revise the agreement because things happen. Right? So like the next revision of our agreement will have like more stuff like about the AARP. And because they can choose each time whether it's being a deal, they're not actually committing anything when they sign. So if they want to use, they can.
They can do things.
Generally speaking, I see like AI as something that repurposes other people's intellectual property and data and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Then also like blockchain technology, that kind of protects because it creates creates smart contracts and like an immutable ledger of like transactions that go along. In the future, I'm thinking like those two technologies in unison probably create like a safer space for artists, creators, just intellectual property in general. Are there any companies that you can think of that are using those technologies together at the moment? And if not, where do you see the future with something that?
So a couple of years ago, 2, 3, whatever years ago, we would get approached almost every week by companies saying, we've got a solution to this, we're using blockchain technology, exactly like you're saying, it provides clarity, that it's totally transparent for artists, you can track the money, it means that you could almost pay people immediately because it all just clicks through. And then the problem is then you ask a question, okay, what information is it relying on? And of course, it's like any information system is reliant on the input. Now, I think with blockchain, the idea is that you almost, if you get a certain volume of information confirming that whatever rights are okay to be right. The problem in the music industry is there's been lots of attempts to have like one database with all the rights. No one can ever agree. No like of the industry organizations can ever agree with each other about formats and stuff. So that blockchain sort of side thing really quietened down. Because the other question we would ask is just some simple stuff like where you get the information from, how's this going to work, and the problem is no one can really explain to us past the very those sort of very basic questions. And a lot of people will come into the music industry actually without knowledge of the music industry, but just like, oh, here's a good application for it. So we saw lots of proposals which didn't make sense. Like, oh, we can use this and then we can pay like 90% of our revenue through to artists. It's much higher royalties.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, well, how are you going to pay like the music publishing rights? Because normally those cost 15%. And you're saying you're paying 90 on it. So I don't think we ever saw a really credible business proposal. I do think there are things out there where people are using blockchain though. But I haven't seen anything yet. But I would not discounting the fact that will at some point be helpful. But please.
How much your service cost? Or you personal?
So the way that we work is we pay. So for every £100 that comes in, we pay out 98.5 to 1.5%. And then at the end of the year, we say, okay, how much money have we made on that 1.5%? What are our total costs? Have we made a profit? And then we have made a profit, which we tend to do. We say, how much of that do we need to keep because it's a business and we've got to be careful about what might happen next year in the future. So, and then the rest of it, we pay a rebate to the members. We pay to members. So after all of that, for the last 3 years, I think the actual effective fee has been about 1.08, 1.09%, which obviously is very, very low. And the key reason we can do that is that the ultimate owners of the organization are the same companies that we represent. So we don't like have someone we have to pay a profit to, it's the same people. So we don't need to worry about that. We'd soon pay as much as we can out to them. It's a very unique model. There's not really any other equivalent. Like,
why shouldn't I like instead in the acne without the
because I had risk. The honest answer is I wouldn't say that I prefer it. It's just it's really how my career has sort of developed. So, I've been doing this for 16 years. And I think I was very lucky because, okay, if you're going to start a digital rights agency, 2008 was a really good year to start it because our first deal was Spotify. So if you're going to choose like a first deal to do, well, that's probably the best first deal to do because it's the most successful like standalone startup. So I don't think that anybody at that point would have predicted how big any of it would have got. And 100% would think it would be impossible that I'd be in the same company for such a long time. So it wasn't, I didn't make like an active choice to say, I don't want to work for major records anymore, working for the media sector. It's just how this opportunity arose. I'd already left EMI, so the opportunity came along. Like I said, the circumstances were really good. It was just very good timing. I mean, I think we've done a really good job, but I think we've executed well, sort of with a sort of good set cards around.
And
with it being 2024 now, someone entrepreneurial was looking to create something now in relation with the music industry. Where would you say they look? And
there's so many different avenues, right? I mean, if you can find the next superstar, you can find the next Adele, I get that, right? That's not so easy to do. So, I mean, we could talk about AI, but we shouldn't forget that ultimately, no artists, no record companies, no record companies have distributed to their own. So it'd be really stupid to lose sight of that. It depends on where your interests and where your sort of talents lie. Because if you can come up with a blockchain solution to solve some problem or other, maybe that's good. Or if you can come up with an AI-based model that you can go to record companies and say, this is a way of engaging with AI that's going to help you enhance your business. It's not going to kill it or cannibalize it. And also it's going to protect you against, so that too. I mean, I think, it's either about talent or really good idea, not just good idea, but the ability to turn that idea into execute it. Because lots of people have ideas, and probably lots of people have good ideas, but to turn that into something real is actually difficult.
Okay. Right. Last question. Favorite record.
Favorite record.
Clean.
Okay. I'm going to give you 3 favorite records extent.
No doubt what it's on.
London Calling by The Clash. Either the Low End Stereo or Big Like Marauders by Tribe Called Quest. And I'm going to give you 4 actually. It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back by Public Enemy. And and maybe Called Fatigue by the Beastie Boys.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.